Oh, hold on a second, Elias. I see we got MMA journalist Mike Russell coming through on the Skype here. Just let me bring him on. This is Mike Russell, MMA journalist. And I know you've been around doing this for a bit, but you only kind of came into my radar recently over when the Tim Hague death happened. And I started seeing people retweeting you or favoriting your tweets, and I started reading a little bit into it. And it seemed to me that and I love making comparisons to things on here, analogies and stuff.
He's a fan of that.
You're kind of the one guy who's really been staying on this Tim Hague thing and the Edmonton Commission. You almost kind of remind me of a guy who's in Act 1 of like one of these crime movies where they're trying to solve it. And there's like that one detective that just won't give up on the case.
Let's go.
And they're just like, come on, man.
Just let it go.
We got all this other stuff. And you're just like, I'm there. And at the end, they're always kind of, that guy is always redeemed. I feel like we're like in Act 2 of the movie. Someday you're going to come out and we're going to look back and go, Mike Russell said this, Mike Russell said that. Let's start with the whole Tim Hague thing. Can you give us, we're going to get into Edmonton card this past weekend, and we'll talk, especially I want to talk about the Gavin Tucker fight. But can you give us the quick backstory on the Tim Hague death and the role that Edmonton's commission may have had in that?
I've actually, like you said, I've been investigating Edmonton for about 2 years now, kind of, loosely. And I think, you saying that not a lot of people are kind of staying with the story. I think that's just because I'm not really a full-time reporter and I'm not getting paid for it. So most of this is just... Well,
I'm saying you're the only one. So you're a part-time, but I'm saying you're staying with it more than full-time reporters.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? I think a lot to do with that is that... I'm one of these guys that just hates people that are being mistreated. So I think that, the reason why I kind of stuck with the story was because, Tim Hague's family was not getting answers. And with Edmonton in general, I was getting a lot of officials and displaced commissioners that were saying there was a lot of crap that went on in Edmonton over the years that needed looking into. So, I guess they kind of, I was taking up their fight for them. So, as I started digging in, I started finding more and more. And then the Tim Hague situation, I kind of put that story of Edmonton kind of in the back burner for a while. And then, when he passed away, my info that the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission actually neglected to register a few of Tim's suspensions for medical suspensions that he'd gotten for knockouts. So I think he was knocked out a total of 6 or 7 times within like 22 months, and 2 of those suspensions were never listed.
Was there a particular reason they gave why they were not listed?
They just neglected to. And what happened was, in both cases with these 2 events, I have copies of the emails sent by Pat Reid. He just did not send them to the proper
And he's like the commissioner guy, right? He's like the head of the...
Yeah, sorry. He's the executive director of the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission. And what happened was there were 2 events, back-to-back events actually, Unified 25 and Unified MMA 26, and he just forgot 2 full fight cards. He never forgot. He just sent them to the wrong people. So Tim had 1 indefinite suspension and 1 other suspension due to a knockout that he'd incurred that was never listed. So due to Edmonton bylaws, Tim should have been suspended. I think it was like 4 different times that the Edmonton Commission let him fight when he should have been suspended, including the last time when he passed away. So he should have been suspended from competing when he died.
And can you tell our listeners who may not know the whole backstory what happened in the fight with the death? It was a boxing match,
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a boxing match, and Tim was brought in. It was short notice, so there are a lot of kind of moving parts with the reason why he was brought in for this fight. So it was Adam Braidwood, who's actually got I think an undefeated either 5 or 6-0 or 7-0 record.
Former CFL player, right? Yeah.
They brought, former CFL player.
Huge.
Anyway, they brought Tim in to fight with 2 weeks' notice, and it was a mismatch. Like, there were a lot of people that claimed it was a mismatch, but the Association of Boxing Commissions actually did a presentation proving that, basically the fight never should have been approved. So I sent around a survey saying, would you have approved this to all the ABC membership? And all of them except for one said no, that came back with an answer. And the one that said yes said only if he would have had further brain scans basically done. So Tim got knocked down, I think it was three or four times in the first round, and then just got bludgeoned in the second round. He wasn't competitive in the fight at any point in the fight. I didn't think there was, the first round was kind of a feeling out process, but he was not in control of the fight. But it just proved that it was a mismatch. So one of the things that's being asked is that the promotion that put on the fight, they actually had a lawsuit against the Edmonton Commission and the city for canceling a few of their events years ago. And they were named in a complaint by a bunch of commissioners and officials that went to city council with a complaint saying that KO Boxing was making operational decisions for the ECSC that they shouldn't have, including appointing referees that they wanted to appoint. So, there's this intimidation and threatening factor that went into all of this lawsuit and the complaint that has to be looked at as far as this investigation goes, I think.
I think it talks about a wider issue in general, and especially with they had a bunch of issues that I've dealt with, where especially there's that layover and that crossover where you depend on the boxing commission to basically act as the infrastructure for mixed martial arts commissions, and we've had issues in regards to Ontario. I could tell you other horror stories, but I think there's something really you're really onto something, Mike, in regards to the ability of, was this more of a symptom or a more chronic issue of them not really doing their due diligence?
And real quick, Mike, before you go, I just want to also mention, you mentioned Adam Braywood, the opponent who knocked out and inevitably, I hate to say it, but killed Tim Hague. And the reason I say it that way is he put out this video afterwards and he was in tears. Like, obviously the Tim Hague death is the big story here, but I really feel bad for Adam Braywood, because this is another thing we don't consider with these commission errors is now this guy has this on his conscience for the rest of his life.
A burden on his shoulders.
Like, he's going to carry that with him, and who knows what long-term mental
psychological
issues that could cause for him. Like, it changed his life forever.
Yeah. I don't know if you know much about Adam's background, but he was pretty forthcoming with, his criminal activity that he was this was boxing he said saved
his life.
So he had like a sexual assault charge years ago, and he had, some drugs and some weapons charges and a bunch of things that he said he was into, organized crime wise and stuff, that he was looking at it as being his savior in his life. But, in the same sense, if you watch that video, he kind of makes some comments generally about Tim, where he died doing what he loved, and it's probably how he would have loved to go out and everything else. Well, you know what? I think that, Elias talks about the symptoms and about, some things that are problematic within the sport. I think number one is that, yourself, Elias, you've probably had fighters and yourself even where, you want to fight maybe when you shouldn't. And I think that's the problem, is that the commission's job, and I kind of simplify it by saying, they're the lifeguard that's supposed to be keeping the kids out of the pool that aren't supposed to be in there. And I think that's, every kid wants to jump in that pool, but not every kid should be jumping in that pool. And I think the same goes, as far as fighters go. Fighters will lie on their applications. They'll tell their coaches they're ready. They'll, lie about injuries that they have, lie about knockouts maybe they've had in sparring. And you know what? The last line of defense that's protecting their lives and their safety is the commission. And, I think that's where we have to look. What was the commission's reason for letting this fight go? And I think, as far as they're talking about this investigation goes into Tim's death and into the commission, I think they need to look at all of those aspects and look at, what was the reasoning behind letting this fight go? Was it just to save the event? And the other problem is that because this is a local commission, it's a city-run commission. And it's the only province in Canada that we have a city-run commission all across their province running events. And the problem, there's the problem with promoters and fighters are getting very close to this commission, and they're maybe doing favors for them, maybe letting things go they shouldn't. Another part of this is that in the city bylaw for Edmonton, it's stated that if they do not have a minimum amount of set rounds, of booked rounds for an event, if it's a dinner event and let's say the main event gets canceled and they're missing those 5 or 6 rounds, well, then it's canceled. The event's canceled. So that's a big mitigating factor, I think, in this, was that they wanted to save this event. And, the commission doesn't get paid, and they're on a cost recovery basis right now in Edmonton because they've blown through so much money that every penny counts. So, there's a lot of factors that need to be looked at.
So at the time of the Tim Hague death a few months back and the UFC coming to Edmonton this past weekend, and with you obviously doing your job, what have we heard from the Edmonton people, the commission, or what pressure is being put on them? Are they under any kind of scrutiny from whoever they must answer to? Are there possible lawsuits or anything like that coming?
I can't speak for the Hague's family, but if it was my family and something like this happened, I'd definitely probably be pursuing a lawsuit. But Edmonton kind of, there was a lot of shell game going on during the week of fight week. The week before they came out, or 2 weeks before, and said that the executive director, who possibly was the one that was responsible for Tim's death by letting him fight, he was basically demoted, and they were saying that his boss, who was just a city worker, like a manager from the city, was in charge. But if you watch the event, I've actually tweeted about it. There was a video clip that I put up that said that Pat Reid was still the executive director, and the other gentleman was just a manager with the city that oversaw it. So, I think a lot of the reasons for a lot of the different moves that they're claiming they're making is just, to shut guys like me up. Because if I'm the squeaky wheel, they've told me, they've already told people from the city not to speak with me, even though, I've offered to help with this investigation because I probably know more about the commission than the commission.
And that was my next question. What kind of feedback have you gotten? And maybe I'm still going back to my movie analogy, but are you getting almost kind of the
confession,
not threats, but are you kind of not getting notes left on your door or anything, but are you kind of getting the vibe of, hey, back off. Nothing to see here.
That's exactly it. And if you look, I was actually tweeted at by a boxer from Edmonton to mind my own business. And why is someone from Ontario digging into what's happening in Alberta? And I'm like, you obviously don't get what journalism is. And I know
exactly.
that MMA journalism and combat sports journalism kind of gets a bad rap sometimes, but I'm trying to do it right, and these guys are telling me no, mind your own business. So I think all of my reporting, if you look at my body of work the last couple of years, I stepped away from reporting. That's actually around the time I met Elias, was when I was helping guys like Fund a Fighter and stuff, right? So I kind of stepped away to work in a different area of the sport before coming back. But when I came back, I said, even if I'm not getting paid, which I'm not, I want to try to make a difference and try to keep up the momentum of the things that I've done, my whole body of work in MMA. And that's, shine a light in areas that need to be, where areas need to be shone a light in. So, I've had some kind of loose threats here and there. I've had some people tell me that when I come to Edmonton, I better watch out, all kinds of different things, but it's no different. I've been threatened by fighters my whole career, so that doesn't bother me. But yeah, as far as this goes, there's a lot of, I think the main issue is people are afraid that combat sports will go away in Edmonton, and that will leave them without a venue to compete under. So I get that part of it, but when you think about this, it's all about safety, and it's all about due diligence, and it's all about protecting fighters. And besides and beyond all of these issues with safety and all of these issues with with commission issues, they've also been for years known as a commission that if you're not a hometown fighter, you don't go to Edmonton because you probably won't win a decision. And that's there are tons of instances of people that have been screwed over when they've gone to Edmonton. And that's when I started my website, was actually I was interviewing Cody McKenzie, and he got suspended obviously for that headbutt to Andrew McInnes in World Series of Fighting Canada, and that's where I first crossed paths with Pat Reid, and he an hour-long interview admitted to me a whole slew of things that the commission had done, and not least of which was that they decided on Cody McKenzie's suspension and punishment by just calling a group of coaches and random industry people together to decide on it. So imagine, Elias, if you went to, let's say, Quebec, and the Quebec officials pulled a bunch of coaches together and said, what do you think we should give this guy from Ontario that just headbutted one of our local fighters? It was just, to me, it just didn't seem like that was the right way to go about doing what they were doing. And then, as I started peeling back more and more layers of the onion, I start getting more and more officials coming to me and saying, look, they let a guy come in with tampered gloves. That's one of the worst things in combat sports. You let a guy take his gloves home, and they came back modified for a fight the next night. There was another fighter who told me that they offered for him to still fight even though his opponent was missing some of the necessary blood tests. So this isn't just about
funky.
One case. That's a big deal.
Well,
so.
Go ahead, Elias.
Well, what I was going to say was then moving forward, obviously what you've talked about in the history and that, moving forward, what did you see in something like an event that just happened with someone like Gavin Tucker?
Exactly what I was going to ask you. You know what you were saying about commissions? I remember I was at a show in Halifax a few years back, and the main event was, I believe it was your former opponent, Mike Kent.
Yes.
And he was scheduled for I think it was him. Sorry if I'm wrong.
3-rounder. It was him against Cody.
It was supposed to be like a 5-rounder. And
yep, Cody Cron.
There was a missed weight or something like that, where it became like a non-title fight. And so thus he thought it was going to be a 3-rounder. And it looked like he just won a 3-round decision. And so he's kind of like, yeah.
That was Cody. Cody thought he won.
And then all of a sudden, they're like, we're going 5 rounds. And he found out in the spot. And so Mike's coach was, at the time, Peter Martell, who runs Titans in MMA.
He's Gavin Tucker's coach.
And that's what I was going to say. So that reminded me of that. And now he's Gavin's coach. And I'm seeing people are giving... I've met Peter before. I don't know him too
really
well.
like Peter in regards to a person that I've known.
Yeah, I've only met him a couple times. He's always been like nice enough to me and everything. But I saw a lot of people obviously were calling about the referee in the Gavin match. But a lot of people were saying that his corner should have maybe thrown something in. And we can get in that another time, but I just wanted to acknowledge it. But the who was the referee in that fight? What was his name?
Other than looking exactly like Jay Leno, he's not obviously not Jay.
Cal Cardinal. So the other thing is,
can I ask you a real quick thing about him?
Cal Cardinal's a coach, right?
Yes.
So
yes. There you go.
He trains.
Do you know if he coached Tim Hague? Someone had told me that.
He used to. So he didn't. Somebody said that he coached him in the fight that he died in. He didn't. Cody Cron actually cornered him in that fight. So that's another question, that these investigators are going to look into is how well did your corners know? How well did Tim's corners know him, and how well did they know his recent history? But as far as Cal Cardinal goes, why is he a referee if he's actually coached and cornered people? Because in Edmonton, there were rules against conflicts of interest that you coach, be an active official.
How weird is that he's the ref in question for letting a fight go on so dangerously when he is a former coach and possibly a friend or knew Tim Hague?
That seems like
Tim Hague. Of all people who should have been the early stoppage that night, maybe you would think it would have been him, and it's the exact opposite. Like, even those guys who were there, the meathead guys who were drunk, were screaming for mercy. They were screaming for mercy to stop that fight.
Both in the fight and also on Twitter and everything. Like, that's how I was checking on this fight. I didn't watch it until after the fact, but it could be also the fact that, again, because of Alberta's tough demeanor in some regards.
It's our Texas.
It's our Texas, exactly like we talked about last time. It's our Texas. And I think there is a too tough for your own good.
Totally.
But that's the whole point of the referee. Like you said, they are the lifeguard. And once again, it seems especially on the big stage with all the eyeballs, not all the eyeballs, because it was a Demetrius Johnson fight and then that fight got canceled. But more or less the idea that even on the big stage, there was still moments of, I guess, a stumble.
Now, Mike, did you? Yeah. I don't know if you saw. I see it's public now, but like I said, I'm just being from Halifax. I'm Facebook friends with Gavin, so I saw his Facebook post this morning. I see it's now on MMA Junkie stuff. Did you happen to see his Facebook post this morning talking about it?
I did. But again, and this goes back to fighter mentality.
Exactly.
Of course, a fighter is going to say, "Don't blame the referee." Of course, a fighter is going to say that. Again. That's and Sarah Kaufman summed it up perfectly. That's why I retweeted her. She said, it doesn't matter. That referee should have saved Gavin Tucker from his own toughness. Exactly. And you know what? Nobody's questioning how tough Gavin Tucker is. He broke how many bones in his face?
Four, but who's counting?
Yeah. He could have had one break, and that could have been enough. And
that's
even
exactly
the fact
what
that
we were talking about.
He had blurry vision. How unsafe is it that he was fighting not being able to see where the
final
punches
two
were
rounds?
coming?
And the fact that, again, especially now that, hindsight's 2020, crap, no pun intended. But the point being, just like you said, and we said earlier, the fact that when you get injured, when you break orbital bones, your eyeball literally unset. Like, he might have to have surgery because of the fact permanent damage, and whether that whether it's the aspect of concussions and how much trauma he actually did take, not even the intermediate damage, but the long-term damage, and the whole point with the referees, like we talked about in safety, but more importantly, that you could fight to live you could live to fight another day.
Literally live to fight another day. Not just the saying, live to fight another day in the literal sense. Not like millennials use the literal.
Exactly.
The literal sense.
Damn millennials. But no, the point being, that's the whole point of it. And unfortunately, we've all said it, or fortunately, we've all said it, how tough Gavin is, but, when a body takes that much damage, and especially so early in one's career, and there are moments, so I even saw on Twitter where people were talking about, well, there goes another hype train or whatever like that kind of thing. It's the fact that he didn't need to take all of that, and it was, I even mentioned it before, specifically the referee, and I don't want to beat him down too much, because I know he has to, if he's compassionate in any sense of the word.
But we're not talking about 4 extra punches. We're not talking about John Jones, Daniel Cormier.
And it was weird. The weird thing was his demeanor of how he was watching. There was no real active urgency. That's the great word I would use. It was just kind of like, he was just looking at it. You know what I mean? He was just kind of just looking at it.
Was there any no? I didn't see the fight. So was there any I'm going to stop it? Hey Gavin, you got to do work. Gavin, you got to protect yours. Gavin, nothing. Oh wow.
Nothing. Almost as if they were not even touching each other. There was no actual contact, let's just say. He was far enough that there was action that was happening, and it was almost just he's hitting him back and he's hitting back. And someone else said it. It was basically a great fight that was let too long. They had moments. There was moments of brilliance on both ends, and then there was a certain point where it should have stopped.
And you said this. You were saying people were saying this. Oh, another hype train, end it. That could have been what people would say if it had been stopped in the second round after he broke the oral rule. But now the fear is not a hype train derailed. It's so much this could become another Chris Holdworth or whatever.
Or David Loiseau.
Exactly.
David Loiseau lost that bad beating he had from and didn't he break his orbital in that fight?
I can't remember. I think he did. I think you might be right.
Yeah. So you know what? This could be one of those career-changing fights. And the scariest part about that is that referee, Cal Cardinal, he's their lead referee in Edmonton. So once all the UFC referees go away, next event that comes, he's going to be the one that's going to be handling most of the action.
So what can be done with this? I guess overall, that my last question would be what can we do other than have guys like you, just rely on guys like you to keep at it?
Well, I think that's an important thing. I think, anybody, if you tweet at them enough, and I'm sure Elias has had it, I've had it before, they're going to get annoyed with you tweeting at them enough. Yeah. So I just tell people, keep tweeting at the city of Edmonton. Keep tweeting at the people that are making the decisions. But, we're going to have this investigation that's going to come in the wake of the Tim Hague tragedy, and it's going to come back, and all of us are going to look at it and shake our heads, because Edmonton has had other investigations into this commission, and they've done nothing about it. They were going to let dream rules go a few years ago in Edmonton, with foot or head stomps and knees to a down opponent.
Pride never dies.
All this other stuff. Yeah. So it never happened. It was supposed to happen. It actually happened it was kind of, they watered it down, but they almost lost their membership with the ABC back then, and it was an issue. And then they lied to the ABC and said, it was the old commission that just left that did all the accepting of the rules. And now I've got proof that they didn't, and now there's another investigation. So it's kind of how many times are you going to have to investigate your own commission before you realize that there's a problem? You can't just keep pretending nothing's going to happen now that there's a death. And I think that's the issue that Edmonton really needs to look at. There was a death, and even the UFC coming, it kind of bothered me that rather than and I'll be honest, there were UFC officials that were reaching out to me in the wake, just before my story came out, revealing that Edmonton had aired numerous times. So they wanted to know how bad it was before the story came out. Story comes out, and next thing you know, they're telling all the fighters that they're increasing their insurance. So they've got more medical insurance, and they've got more liability insurance in case they die, but there's really no other protection because it's the same Mickey Mouse Commission that's handling everything.
And now I see
that must have been unsettling.
I see now UFC exec Dave Shaw says an Edmonton return plan despite commission controversy. Now, as I said to Elias off air earlier, I go, is this like they did in Alberta before, where they're like, we're coming back, Calgary, sorry about that shitty car, like the start of the Alberta curse. This is the thing where they just say that and they'll probably not come back for a while till things clear up.
4 years?
Or they just like, hell, we had a main event dropout on what a card that people were already saying wasn't great anyway. And it's still, they're saying today, was still a sellout. So it wouldn't be crazy for them to think to go back despite this. These issues.
See, there's a lot of politics, I think, that went into this decision for them to come to Edmonton this time around.
Well, the new stadium was probably a big part, right? Need to show off that new stadium.
Well, yeah, it's WME. WME is the main reason they came in the new arena. So a year ago, an official and former executive director, commission member, told me that Mark Ratner had literally told him that as long as Pat Reid was still in power, they had no design of coming back because at the WEC 49 event, they had such issues with commissioned doctors that they didn't want to go into the cage to check on down fighters. So that was one issue. There were multiple operational and other issues that happened. So they said they weren't coming back. Well, lo and behold, WME IMG buys it, and they go around and make deals with all these brand new arenas. And they also made a little side deal with one of their properties that they manage is this Pabst Blue Ribbon, like rodeo or bull riding circuit. So they're actually coming to Edmonton. They made this long
because they own that too, right?
They own that. That's what the WME owns.
Yep. So there are a lot of I think points that went into this, and I had somebody off the record. Well, not even off the record. Mark Ratner didn't say this for attribution, but he did make it known that he doesn't have the decision-making power that he used to now that WME is in charge. But in Mark's defense, he does really concern himself with safety.
He really cares.
Fighter safety
He really does
and
care.
regulation, because that's his bread and butter. And he gets pretty heated and pretty angry when things are being taken advantage of. So apparently, Kyle Cardinal, after that fight, had one more prelim he was supposed to referee, and he got pulled, and so did the judge that got the
29-27 for Gavin. Who was that judge?
Well, that was Pat Reid's old assistant that just happened to become a judge somewhere along the way.
And that's the person who scored a 29-27, where the other two were a 30-25 and a 30-24 in a beating where the guy's four
didn't even add
up his face, and he gave him a round.
Yep.
Oh my God!
So their top two, official and judges that they appointed, that were kind of Pat Reid's golden child, they both screwed up so bad that they got pulled from the remainder of the card. So it's what's going to happen now when we've got a boxing event coming in there, and we've got another MMA event coming in here in the next month. And the biggest scam of it all was they announced that Pat Reid had been demoted, that he was no longer executive director. And then again, I posted the video. They announced that he was executive director, and the other guy was just some manager overlooking.
Donald Trump's. He's not running any of his businesses now that he's president, right? Wink, wink.
No, of course not. Or his Twitter.
No. Oh yeah, exactly. Before I let you go. I was saying before, and like I said, there's no proof that this is coming, but a lawsuit could be a possible thing. Are you prepared that you could possibly have to talk in court?
Absolutely. I've already offered.
Oh.
I've got more than one investigation I'm working on that I actually.
That was my next question.
Yes.
My next question is, I go, who are you pissing off next? That was my next question. Who are you piss off next?
I think that was a previous
one.
one.
Through my website, there's Ali Abdelaziz, and you'll see quite often, and I kind of revealed his background of being. He was a member of. People like to use the catchphrases, but he was actually a member of a Muslim extremist terrorist group that had been. There was actually in Toronto, this group planned a bombing that would have killed between 4,500 and 10,000 people in 1991. He was a member of this group and then turned informant against them after he got caught flying, actually on 9/11. He got caught.
Ironically, today, when we're recording this, we're recording this on 9/11.
It was on 9/11. So he was flying from Egypt to New York City on 9/11 with a fake passport and with an American girlfriend that he had fooled into believing that he was someone else that he could use as an alibi.
Speaking of fake, does he have like a fake background in martial arts? Because I saw this video where he was in a jiu-jitsu tournament against who was it from Japan?
There's a few, that he got beat pretty handily.
But he basically got armbarred. Shinya Aoki or someone like that. Or someone like that. Basically armbarred him in like a minute or something, to the point where people were like, who are you?
I discovered,
how are you even, how did this get together?
How did I figure it all out?
Oh no, like the point of that fight was almost like, why were those two guys even in the same match? Same match. It seemed like such a mismatch. Yeah, almost like he lied about his background.
He's from Egypt originally. So his lie originally was that he came over here for the Olympics to compete in the Olympics in judo. So in reality, he came over here and lied about his judo background. He apparently has a black belt from Egypt, but it's like there's different levels of black belts. So this is like
not all black belts are
a YMCA level black belt that like a 16-year-old would have.
Right.
So he came over with this black belt and used it to con his way into training at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado, just because he was a bouncer and people were like, hey, this guy, he was choking guys out as he was bouncing. You know what I mean? Like choking them out unconscious that were untrained and dropping them on their heads, and he got a reputation. So next thing you know, he's training at the Olympic the Olympic Training Center, and that's how his mixed martial arts career and all of his he manages like 100 guys now.
Right. And so you mentioned earlier
guys of the top UFC fighters.
About conflicts.
Yeah. So he went to jail for 2 years for the passport fraud. And then when he came out, the NYPD were going to deport him, and then they took him on as a CI. And he was inside of the group that he was a member of, married to a girl in the group, had a kid with a girl in the group, and was a CI for about 8 years. And then the FBI and the NYPD cut him off because they figured he had been feeding them false information to get paid. So,
were you the one that had the story that came out a couple years ago? Were you part of that? I remember reading the story.
That was me.
Yep.
Yeah, that was
I
me.
remember. Okay, yeah, I definitely remember. So was he also he had financial involvement with World Series of Fighting, and he was also like he was like almost like a matchmaker or something like that. And he was also
both sides of the table.
So he was getting like
he was managing and
matchmaking
VP and matchmaker.
That's like American Greed, white collar type shit. And so the other thing,
he was paying his guys $100,000 per fight in World Series of Fighting.
That's
why he had like all of the champions. He had all of these guys, and that's actually where I started picking up the case. When I was with Fun to Fighter, we were getting some of these guys and some of the guys from Montreal that Elias has worked with through TriStar Dorms and stuff. We were getting complaints from fighters that he was trying to strong arm them into signing with them.
So basically,
he was threatening to sit them and all this stuff. So we faked. And Miguel Torres and I faked a management firm to block Ali Abdelaziz from forcing certain fighters that he was trying to force into signing to manage him. So it was like we were undercover for a couple of years. So
this is
lots of stories to tell.
This is and so the other thing I've noticed with this guy is, as you said, he's originally from Egypt. Was it or so?
Yep, he was born in Cairo. I think he's from Cairo.
His English isn't the greatest. And he manages a lot of fighters. And I've noticed that he likes to also manage their social media accounts. So I remember years ago, all of a sudden, Frankie Edgar came out and just started talking this shit like he's never talked before in his life. And he also and I think it was like all caps, and it just didn't, you're like, that's not how Frankie Edgar talks. And then he slipped a couple times. He's posted from what he thought was one account and onto another, and people have been able to figure out that he will go and post on behalf of his clients, and especially these guys who aren't into social media.
And he said he was going to knock out Frankie's next opponent in his next fight. And it was like, I'll knock you out in one round and all this stuff, and it was his own account. So he looked pretty foolish. But he's had a long history, as far as him, doing and saying things he shouldn't. He actually, and I'm not going to bring up the name, but there was a journalist that he reached out to that reported because of my reporting, he lost his job at World Series of Fighting. So that day that my story came out, I got a call in the morning asking how bad it was. Again, how bad is it? Do we need to be concerned? And then Ray Seffel hung up the phone, and an hour later, I think they let Ali go. So, he phoned up a reporter who basically credited me for breaking the story that he was let go, and said that if he didn't remove my name from the story, they'd have issues next time they saw each other. And this specific journalist would fly to Europe and do commentary and stuff. And he had to stop doing that because Ali basically threatened that he would be, in Russia or one of these places, that he would make sure that his guys knew where he was. He was asking him when he was going back and all this stuff. So, my biggest issue is that mainstream media, and I'm not going to bring any names up, but there are a lot of mainstream MMA media that refuse to acknowledge my work because they're afraid that it's going to put them in a bad place as far as access to Ali and his fighters go.
It seems pretty obvious when you say who are the biggest shows out there, MMA journalists. You just have to look at who get the biggest guests and stuff. And it would seem to me that if a lot of these shows rely on the guest, and if one manager controls a lot of the big guests, you risk. Does that thing kind of happen where you're scratching of backs and?
Well, it does. It happens probably more than it should. With me, I tend to not let it happen. You know, I'm friendly with people and I'm friends with people. But I mean, if I found out Elias was a terrorist, I'd be writing about it. Right. So to me, I don't really protect people's feelings as much. And I think, you know, I've had fighters that I wrote commentary about how they were losing a fight up until they won the fight, and it was 100% honest, and I've been threatened before. You know, I'll knock your glasses off your face, I'll smack you next time I see you, stuff like that you just kind of go, well, whatever. You know, I'm not really in this to make friends, I guess, and to be the guy that gets to go to the buffet line at the UFC events. You know, I've covered MMA since 2006, and I think I've been credentialed by the UFC once, and it was to a press conference when they announced they were coming to Toronto. So really, it doesn't really hinder me to not be able to go to events or to get access to certain guys. But, you know, you got to think of this in the other sense. If you're going to, you know, hide or bury or not acknowledge a story because it's going to hurt you as a reporter, then you kind of have to question what your integrity is and your ethics are. Because, you know, the flip side of that is now, because I'm an independent site that has to do my due diligence to the umpteenth degree so I don't get sued. Now I'm getting comments on my website and comments where people are posting on different websites like Reddit and stuff saying, oh, this must be fake because none of the big MMA journalists are acknowledging.
And here's the other ironic thing in that.
That's the shade it throws.
Is the people who are backed by giant media companies,
they're biased.
Some of these MMA sites are not just these like little independent things that I think a lot of people think. Like, MMA Junkie is tied in with USA Today. MMA Fighting
the UFC
is with
advertises full-page ads in USA Today, right?
Exactly. SB Nation with MMA Fighting, Bloody Elbow, lots of those. Like you said, you're the guy. You have to be very picky because you don't have a giant corporation of to pay for lawyers and stuff. And these guys who do work for companies that have that are afraid. Are doing it. It's almost like I feel like the role should be, you should be the guy that's afraid to say shit because you need access. And those are the guys who should be able to say whatever they want because they've got huge backings behind companies. But then again, what gets those big backings for those companies is advertiser dollars, and what gets advertiser dollars is ratings, and what gets clicks is fighters, and you need those access.
Chicken before the egg argument, right?
Man, this is a real. I never realized like how political, like so much of the stuff.
It's not an easy sport, man. I was full time for about 3 or 4 years where I made better money than I made at like some unionized jobs, like when I worked at Bombardier and stuff here. And you know, since about 2014, when I came back to MMA journalism, I worked for Yahoo Sports, and it was a culture shock. I went from being the editor at Cage Potato. You know, that was kind of where I worked most of, you know, for 2 full years. I was the editor there, full time, making very good money, putting out 4 stories a day, running, you know, like a bunch of contributors. And then, you know, when I came back, I went to Yahoo Sports, and without giving me a list, they told me who I could and couldn't write about. It was one of those kind of like pitch bases where it would be like, can I write about this today? Can I do this? And it was basically every time you gave them a GSP, a Conor McGregor, a Ronda Rousey, you know, a list of people to write about. So my problem was, and the reason I walked away, which was actually because of that, I said, we're contributing to this problem. You know what I mean? We're making MMA news like TMZ because we're not writing about what's newsworthy.
Ironically,
we're writing about what is click-worthy. So, you know, we're feeding news to people, telling them, you know, you got to trust me, this is news because I'm a respected journalist, but we're feeding them crap. You know, it's bull. And I'm like, I can't do that. So I walked away from my last paying job. So, you know, I've been talking about it for a while, and it's a bit of work. I'm trying to put out a crowdfunding campaign so I can, you know, I want to be like the CBC of MMA writing. I want to be. You mean if it's publicly funded?
You want the government to pay for you? Is that what you're saying? You want our tax dollars to pay for you? Is that what you're saying? No.
Publicly funded. I'm not letting the government touch it. But if I'm publicly funded, it keeps me accountable, because if I am not doing my job properly, then people aren't going to, you know, put any money in. As soon as you start putting ads on your site, you may even if you get the perception of a conflict of interest, then it hurts your integrity.
Well,
so, that's very true.
You know, can just get advertisers
even unintentionally. Even unintentionally, it could be you might not want to bite the hand that feeds you, whether intentional or not.
Exactly. Exactly. And I remember when I was with Cage Potato years ago, I was torn when, I go to the site and at the top there's a banner ad that somebody from head office had sold to like Strikeforce. It's like, we're advertising at the top of our website. And you know what? Cage Potato wasn't really known for the hard-hitting stories. And I think I was kind of the one that came in and started doing, like when Impact FC, that Australian promotion came in and ripped everybody off. Yep. I was the one that broke that story. And, I kind of, it was a different style of writing.
They were the fun site.
But
they were the fun site.
Like
jokey
It was lighthearted. It was like they used to call us like the Cracked magazine of MMA reporting.
Great parallel.
To me,
Cage Potato would be all over fighters shitting their pants in the cage. Like they would cover that story really. It's fun. Well, Mike,
and they're always putting in girl galleries and stuff like that to try to get hits up. But at our heyday, and I replaced, I think it was Ben Folks that was there before me.
Yep.
In our heyday, we had like 2 million hits a week.
That's tremendous.
It was crazy how many impressions and how many followers we had. But I felt torn about that. And the facts are, there are a lot of, if you look around at some of these websites now, MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, there's a new trend where they've put these sections in that are like basically where they're writing their TMZ news, and nobody's signing it. They're calling it, this is by MMA Junkie staff.
Blue Corner.
This is by MMA Fighting staff.
Yeah.
MMA Junkie now has this thing called the Blue Corner.
That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they're not putting their names on it. If you're too embarrassed to write it, don't write it. And I know what it is. It's all about clicks. And it's all about, you're going to bring in people that want to see some girl in a bikini or whatever. But great. Yep. Don't call yourself an MMA news site if you're pandering to that crowd, because you can't be all things to everyone. And, to me, I just want to be a news site. I just want to write, do investigative stuff.
Well, speaking of your site, how can people help you with your site? How can people help your GoFundMe? Where can we find that? Where can we find your writing?
My writing's realfightstories.com. If you go back, there's only basically 2 pages, and that's the thing. People have been complaining that I'm not putting out enough work. I've had people complain that, all he writes about are 2 subjects, because, again, I'm doing this in my free time.
And that's how you get an in-depth into something, where it's like, it's not the case of beating it to a dead horse. It's the case that there's so much more to write about.
Why was Spotlight just focusing on the pedophilia in the church? Why did that take them so long to write that story? You know what I mean? Like, that's these
so
2 stories.
Many layers,
And you have to cover your ass.
Like you said, onion is the best way to describe it. There's so many layers to it.
You start peeling, and there's so much. And that's kind of, the interesting thing for me, and I've kind of, over the past couple of years, I've developed, as far as my sources go, like my relationships with them and stuff. And, it's interesting to me because it reminds me a lot of like police work. And like you said, you're like a detective that's finding stuff. It's funny you say that. About 9 months ago, I signed up for a private investigator course. So, that'll probably be the other line of work that I may have to go into if I can't make a go of it in combat sports writing. But, I want to be the guy that's showing all of the different angles and why it's important. And I think that's, the problem is, the way that MMA websites work right now is you're paid per click. So they're paying for sites that are sexy, or stories that are sexy stories that bring in clicks, but they're not paying for the kind of stuff I do, because it actually doesn't bring in a lot of traffic, especially for the amount of time and the amount of money they're putting into it. Because, I've spent money on ordering criminal records, and I've spent money on, calling sources overseas and in the States. And, it's not a glorious job to do the type of work that I do and maybe 4 or 5 others in MMA are doing. But again, it's because it doesn't pay the bills. But if I'm not tied to money, and if I'm not tied to clicks, and if I'm not tied to ads, that's where I think that's going to be the most important kind of reporting. So, if I can make a go of it and start hiring on some other like-minded individuals to help with some of the heavy lifting, I think we could really do something great. And, when I started in the sport, I was working at the Fight Network. Was one of my first major jobs that I had, and I was working under Loretta Hunt, and we had a really good news team that we were doing. I was doing a weekly Canadian column with like 5 or 6 different news stories in the column every single week from 2006 to 2008. So I want to get back to that style of, New York Times type reporting, where you go and you read it and you're like, oh my God, look at this. And the nice thing is, everybody reads one of my stories and then says they go back and they find something the next time they read it that they didn't notice. A link you can click that brings you to those court docs, or, a link that brings you to another video and stuff like that. So a lot of my stories, if you've read them once, go back and check them out again, because I'll even add stuff to it that kind of accentuates it. So yeah, if you go to realfightstories.com. Because of my time limitations right now, just because I'm, doing other things that I need to do to make money and to raise my family because I have 5 kids.
You're not prostituting, are you, Mike?
What's that?
So you're not prostituting, are you?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm a recovering Catholic.
I've seen your Twitter picture. I've seen your Twitter picture. The Bears would like you. I think you might be a bear. I don't know, but
oh yeah,
yeah.
Really. Actually, you know what's funny about that? I'm not even that big of a guy, but Aaron Bronsteter from TSN, when I met him a couple years ago at an event before a UFC event, he was like, "Man," he said, "I thought you were a great big fat guy. You're not. I'm pleasantly surprised." Like, yeah, you know what? I guess the picture's deceiving.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, it seems like a lot of people in the MMA world don't like you, but we like you.
There you go.
We like you here.
That's half the battle.
At the main event.
I wouldn't say a lot. Maybe
couple.
I could count on 2 hands people that want me dead, but those are the people you need to look for.
That's a pretty good number, but Mike,
I'll keep the list in my top drawer of my desk.
We will. We'll definitely have you back on very, very soon, especially if any. Especially talk about the news. If I tell you what, if I ever feel like there's something out there that is not being covered, we will definitely have you back on to get it out there in the world. And hopefully, even though we're new, we're starting out, our small audience is building. Like, hopefully, if somebody hears that and shares it, we can just get the word out about you. Like, one, I want to talk to you, but also give whatever little platform we have here so far to get your word out, because I feel you're doing important work, and my fear is you might give up on it if you don't feel it's worth your time someday. And hopefully it's going to be worth your time. And like I said, hopefully this is just act 2 of the movie, and we're going to see the final where you redeem. I would say redeem, but it's proven that you were right all along. And we'll look back and kind of go. People. I feel we'll look back and people will say they were investigating this more than they would. People say, "Yeah, we were talking about that back then," when really it's pretty much just you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess I'm a bit of an OCD guy, and that's kind of you talk about. People get into fighting because they really love fighting. I was, when I got into writing, I was too old for fighting. So I was like 30. I went back to school, was taking PR to hopefully get a job maybe with the UFC when they came to Canada, and I just went the other route. So yeah, anybody, if they've got any stories or any investigations or anything that need looking into, just send me a message through Twitter or through my website. I've got a list of other people that have kind of come to me with important things that they want me to look into. But again, it's just, getting to it. If I can do this more on a full-time basis, then I'll do as much as I can.
We're going to help make that happen. And what can we find you on? How can we find you on Twitter? What's your handle?
Mike Russell MMA, all one word.
Beautiful. And before we go, Mike, I will say you mentioned before about Adam Braywood saying that he had thought that Tim Hague. He said at least he'd gone out doing what he loved. I would disagree on that. I think the only person that ever went out died doing what they love was Joan Rivers, who died having plastic surgery. So. All right, buddy.
You can have that one.
Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you later. Mike Russell, MMA on Twitter. Follow his writings. He's covering the stories that most people aren't. And also, while you're on Twitter, check me out, Travis Turner TO and Elias Theodorou. And and those names are both on Instagram and on Twitter. That's it for this week. Back next week to talk about UFC in Pittsburgh. Maybe a little Triple G and Canelo. Until then, hasta luego.